Sometimes you need to get knocked down before you can really figure out what your fight is and how you need to fight it. Chadwick Boseman. Yo, guys, what is going on? It is bright and early on this Wednesday, September 2nd. I want to welcome you back to the 19th episode of TTP. It's been a good week so far. Obviously, we're trying to honor the legacy of great actor, great humanitarian Chadwick Boseman. Second episode of this week. If you want to check out our video on Monday, I believe, who did we talk? Oh, we actually talked about our favorite NBA games of this past decade. Got some good responses from you guys, and that was a fun video to make, but I think we got some big things planned today as well.
Yeah, so today we're going to be looking at the great Adrian Peterson, otherwise known as AD all day, or some people call him also Purple Jesus, apparently, because I guess when he was on the Vikings, he was amazing. But I guess I'll start off with Adrian Peterson's early years. Now, Adrian Peterson was born in Texas to two parents who had a pretty decent sports history. His father played as a shooting guard for Idaho State, but he was his dream of going to the NBA was derailed when his brother he was cleaning a gun and then it discharged into his leg, and then he wasn't able to go to the NBA. Yeah, his father.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty sad, but he was fine, but it just didn't help his career, right? And his mother was actually a track star as a sprinter and long jumper. So Adrian Peterson had a family that was into sports, and he himself as well was really, really into football, basketball, and track. The basketball and track, the two sports his parents played, but he excelled the most in football.
Okay, I guess you could say he was into football, basketball, and other shit.
That's a great point. Yeah. Shout out TTP. Okay.
Follow, subscribe to TTP down below.
Subscribe to TTP down below. Yeah. And Adrian Peterson was great every year in high school, except one year he wasn't eligible to play. I'm not sure of the reasons, but in his senior year, I would say that was his best high school season when he almost had 3,000 rushing yards and 252 attempts. So he averaged around 11.7 yards a carry, and he got also 32 touchdowns. He was so good in high school that players from other teams would ask for his autograph. They probably knew he was next, and he was such a big recruit coming. Actually, wait, no, I need to go to college. Actually, this is, I guess, something I can talk about because he hasn't gone yet. But he was such a big recruit coming out of high school that people began pondering the question: are there players that will be able to make the jump from high school to the NFL? It's just a question that people ask because Peterson was so good. But obviously, Peterson went to college. He chose between two schools that he thought were championship contending schools, Oklahoma and USC. We actually talked about USC at around that time in an episode before about the Rose Bowl in 2005. So go check that one out as well. But yeah, Peterson ultimately chose Oklahoma. And now the team had some decent seasons, I would say. But Adrian Peterson himself as well was also really good, especially in 2004 when he had 1,900 rushing yards and 15 touchdowns. He actually finished second in Heisman voting, only behind Matt Leinart, who we talked about in the USC Rose Bowl video.
Great kid.
Yeah.
I was actually looking at something kind of interesting. Before we go past this too far, I was looking at his high school recruiting page on 24/7 Sports, and he's actually tied for the 16th greatest high school recruit of all time. And it's a little flawed because a lot of the new people, a lot of the guys in the last 5 to 10 years are a lot higher. Like number 1 is Jadeveon Clowney. Number 2, or tied with him, Robert Nkemdiche. Then Rashawn Gary, the current Packer. So it's a lot of these new guys.
Yeah.
But he was, again, 16th. And the interesting thing here, guess who he was tied with?
Jamal Charles.
To the
No.
The place, I think. Yeah, he's tied with Leonard Fournette.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so
Interesting.
very, very relevant. They
Very
both had ratings of
Fournette.
0.9996.
Oh, very
Um,
interesting. Very
I'd
interesting
say,
question.
Fournette's tried to model that kind of, hard nosed running Adrian
Hasn't
Peterson
ha,
had, but hasn't
hasn't
had
done
much
it.
success so far. But you never know.
Yeah, yeah,
and
you
then
never
yeah,
know.
maybe next year they'll be teammates this year. You never know.
Yeah,
But
you know, man. But
anyway,
you know,
just a little fun fact.
yeah. And I guess just continuing on this, Adrian Peterson did find success, especially in that first year. They made the BCS national championship in 2004 2005 season, but they lost to USC and they lost 55-19. USC was just a really dominant team at the time. They were arguably
Circle jerk.
the best team in the country. This is just us going crazy over USC again.
Oh my
We
god,
love
bro. Holy
USC. Oh my
fuck.
God, they're so good. I love Matt Leinart. I love Reggie Bush,
Dude, imagine Matt
Brandon
Leinart
White.
if Matt Leinart was starting in that Super Bowl against the Steelers. Like imagine.
Imagine, dude. Oh my God, Matt Leinart had GOAT potential. I'm kidding.
He did.
All right. Okay, and then in his sophomore season, Peterson didn't play as much because of an injury. And Oklahoma themselves didn't find much success. They had one of their worst seasons in around like 7 years. And Oklahoma ended up going 8-4 that year. Um, After his junior year season, and he had a decent season. He only played 7 games and rushed for 1,000 yards still, with 5.4 yards average per carry and 12 touchdowns. So he was still pretty efficient and solid, a solid player. But then he decided to enter the draft. Um, and when people made comparisons of Adrian Peterson to other players when he was coming out of the draft, because he had such a unique combination of different things that make running backs great, speed, agility, and things like that. He was compared to guys like Eric Dickerson, Jim Brown, Walter Payton. But Eric Dickerson was the closest one he was compared to. Um, Actually, Mel Kiper said, "You can make the argument Peterson's the best player in this draft, if not certainly one of the top three." And he really, I guess, it's surprising that he didn't go earlier than this, I guess. But guys that went before him in this draft, the great Jamarcus Russell, Calvin Johnson. If you haven't seen that video, go check that one out. There's a lot of opportunities here. Wow. Calvin Johnson, obviously a great player. But Adrian Peterson got taken by the Vikings with the 7th overall pick. And the next running back to be taken was, Marshawn Lynch, maybe a player we're going to talk about in the future. But yeah, just an overall, a pretty decent draft class, I would say. Especially this first round is it's full of many really great players: Patrick Willis, Darrell Revis, Joe Thomas, Dwayne Bowe, Mike Griffin, but just a lot here. Now in his first season with the Vikings, he did what, oh my God, it was I would say that's kind of unexpected for a running back, but he had a crazy finish to the season. He only started 9 games, only played 14, and he rushed 238 times for 1,341 yards, averaging 5.6 yards a carry, and he finished with 12 rushing touchdowns that season. Just incredible numbers by Adrian Peterson in that season. And in 8 games, he actually already had 1,036 yards, and it was the best 8-game performance by a rookie in NFL history. And he actually won the Pro Bowl MVP that year, and he was the Offensive Rookie of the Year, which is no doubt, I guess that makes sense. And the Vikings at this time, they weren't terrible. They were moving on. They were moving up, I would say. They were 8-8 this season, finished second in their division. But in the next season, they took a mile jump, and they went 10-6, back behind Adrian Peterson, 1,760 yards and 10 touchdowns. Just looking at that right now, and he averaged 4.8 yards a carry. Not the most efficient, but still best seasons of his career. But, there's more we're going to talk about later, but actually, especially 2012, his MVP season is the one we're going to be focusing on the most. But I think the 2008 season's one that definitely deserves some recognition as well. The Vikings ended up
wow.
the next year too, yeah. The Vikings ended up losing the wild card to the Eagles, who were led by Donovan McNabb, Brian Westbrook, but just overall decent teams. At the time, the Vikings had Tavares Jackson, rest in peace, who was a pretty decent starter for them. I'd say he really got the job done there. But in the next season, the Vikings bring in Brett Favre, the legendary quarterback, in for a final season. Who he really didn't disappoint Brett Favre that season, especially having Adrian Peterson and Brett Favre together was really came through for them. They ended up finishing 12-4. Adrian Peterson still had some crazy stats this year. Not crazy, but actually though they're pretty
pretty comparable to the year before. I mean, in terms of total yardage,
in terms of
more touchdowns and more catches.
Yeah, because he was more efficient, I guess, in the receiving game this year, or just like he was more involved in the receiving game, receiving 57 targets, and more efficient too. Yeah.
But yeah, look at the yards per reception there. So,
oh yeah, that's really good. Yeah. And I mean, just I guess that's the effect of having a player like Brett Favre around him. And he finished with a career high 18 touchdowns this season, and almost nearly 1,400 yards. And the Vikings actually went 12-4 this season, one of their best finishes in. This is their best finish in a season since like 1976. This 12-4 record. I mean, they'd made the playoffs obviously, but this was like definitely one of the best seasons they'd had in a few decades, I would say.
Yeah, and something else to look at. I'm not sure it's kind of stuck with him throughout his career, but his fumbling issue, these first 3 seasons were the worst in his career. Rookie season he had 4, in 2008 9, and in 2009 he had 7. So,
yeah. So he's always been known for, I guess, his biggest con has always been the fumbling issues. But yeah, and I mean it's actually
he dialed it down a lot, but it's still in 2013 he had 5, 2015 he had 7, which were still his better seasons in his career, but
it's and it actually like the fumbling issues were something that kind of did haunt them later on that season, because when we fast forward to the NFC Championship, actually a video that we made, check that video out as well. Some great shout outs here, but Saints Vikings NFC Championship, empty scandal exposed. But that game as well, I think AP had 2 or 3 fumbles. Even though the Vikings were able to stay into that game, take it to overtime. Pearson still, did his job, but he fumbled a couple times there, which could have
the handoff too. Really,
I think in the red zone as well.
Yeah,
but,
right after the interception.
Yeah, exactly, and like that really could have turned like, I guess, the tide in that game. But Adrian Peterson still was and still is, a great. You respect how well the Vikings did that season. They were on the cusp of making a Super Bowl with a matchup against. I think Brett Favre versus Peyton Manning would have been a really interesting Super Bowl to see, but we got Drew Brees and Peyton instead. That was interesting, but that many one and done teams. Like that's like pretty one and done, right? They were really good in 2009. I don't know, but yeah, 2010 they go 6-10. They don't really, or 2010 they go 6-10, and I'm not sure if he was first team All Pro again, but in 2009, 2008 he actually made first team All Pro twice, and in the 2010 2011 season. He was voted as the best running back by that was the first year of like the NFL top 100 list, and he was ranked third overall that season. So,
by the way, he was second team.
Yeah. Oh, he was second team that season. Okay, but yeah, he was first the previous two, I think. Yeah, and this season actually, as Troy was talking about his fumbling issues, I would say those were fixed quite easily. He only had one fumble this season. And yeah, moving on to 2011, this is the season where it looked like the issues that come with running backs were starting to come into play. So the Vikings actually signed Peterson.
Also, before we go to 2011, just to put into perspective, I guess Peterson's status in the NFL, he was voted the best running back, and he was in the NFL 100 players of 2011. He was the third overall player.
Who was even ahead of him? I would assume like Brady.
Yeah, I think Brady
and Breeze
won.
And those guys.
It was Brady, Peyton Manning, Adrian Peterson.
Oh, yeah, not bad.
So
yeah, no.
Yeah, and looking at this entire list, after that was Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, Troy Polamalu, Andre Johnson, Darrelle Revis, Drew Brees, just Hall of Famers, right behind him.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I mean, guys, continuing with the 2011 season, going off that, the Vikings did sign Peterson to the biggest running back contract, NFL history at that time. They gave him $96 million over 7 seasons. So that's around how many per season? Is that around 13?
Yeah,
something 13.8. Yeah, a little under 14 million. Just to put in perspective, Alvin Kamara's asking for more money than that, isn't he? How much
that was also like 10 years ago.
That's true. That was 10 years ago. That's true.
Yeah.
And I guess they're not comparable, but still,
Also, this contract, I think it was back-ended. So it's like at the end of his career, he would be getting a lot more money. So
yeah,
I guess that benefits the Vikings because you can't. I don't think the Vikings even assumed that he make it 7 seasons. But
yeah, that's true.
How much was he guaranteed on that contract?
I believe I'll talk about this later, but I believe in when he decided to he decided to sign with the Saints, the Vikings didn't pick up their team option of $18 million.
Oh, damn.
And that was a 2016.
Okay.
So,
all right.
I mean, he made it quite far in that contract then, right?
Yeah.
Like 5 or so years.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Yeah, and I mean, continuing on with 2011, this is the season that comes, obviously right before 2012 season, but I think it's something crazy we're going to talk about right after this. But he was injured in week 10 this season with a high ankle sprain, and this ended up being in the next game, and I think on December 24th is what it says. That's probably around like week 15, 16. He was injured again, and he actually needed help off the field in this game against the Redskins, the Washington football team. And then he was placed on injured reserve because he had a torn ACL and MCL. And this was the first time in his first, how many years has this been? First in his 5 seasons that he's been in the league that he didn't get 1,000 yards. He was close though, at around 970, but he obviously would have reached that if he wasn't injured. But yeah,
also, he also had a torn meniscus. So
ACL, MCL, and meniscus.
Yeah, all in one hit.
Oh wow.
I thought meniscus was later in his career.
No,
he tore meniscus twice. He
tore it again, but
oh jeez.
Yeah. So all in one hit, he tore all those
Yeah.
Ligaments? I don't know. I'm not great at sports science.
I guess we can.
I'm not just sports science, just like it just is medical facts right here.
Yeah. I guess that's it for 2011 season. Vikings weren't great again. 3-13 actually. What am I saying? They're not great. They were trash. But okay. Rod, if you want to talk about the big season now, you can go ahead.
Yeah. So before we move on to the actual season, talk a little bit about the injury, just a little bit. Again, I don't know a whole lot about ACLs, MCLs, and whatnot. Just doing a little bit of reading here. So apparently, when you tear an ACL, it can lead to like bleeding within the knee joint, and that's something called hemarthrosis. And to deal with hemarthrosis, usually surgeons want to wait maybe a few weeks before operating on the knee. I'm sure maybe these infections, maybe stuff worse. But Adrian Peterson had surgery just 6 days later by Dr. James Andrews. James Andrews, one of the most well-known surgeons in sports history, mostly with baseball, but does a lot in the NFL too. So he gets operated on just 6 days after this injury, and I'm sure this affects everything, right? Because he ends up playing week 1, and he was questionable week 1. If he had surgery on time, which would have been weeks to maybe a month after the injury, he would have season, and that would. But he's already ahead of schedule right after this injury. It just shows a lot about his physique and his body type, and maybe his character too. But regardless, he somehow makes it back and starts week 1. That's what's kind of crazy. I was very shocked that his workload was as big as it was, despite literally being 9 months. But it's pretty far up there. And again, 9 months after an ACL injury. And the season continues, and he really, sorry, yeah.
I was gonna say, I was doing some research, and for ACL injuries, usually it's around 12 months of recovery. And I assume that, playing a sport like football, it would be longer, and especially, if it's coupled with, an MCL tear and a meniscus tear. So it just, it talks about a lot of, things about Adrian Peterson, his character, his ability to take risks in his career. And, this could have really ended badly. And that's why I think, going into the season, that's why it's so impressive that he was able to do what he did.
And I think I'm looking at the same thing that Ro was reading or talking about. But I mean, like, apparently, like, once you recover, like, you can return to, like, what it says is normal activity, which doesn't mean, what you do in football. Like, it's strenuous physical exertion, right? And you're constantly doing that. But he did this after 9 months after an ACL tear, which makes this whole season so much more impressive because doing that, especially after the torn ACL, was just huge.
And not even just that. I mean, that's really impressive. But then also, it's not that he recovered in 9 months. He recovered earlier than that, right?
Yeah.
No, I was gonna say he recovered earlier than that because he had to play in training camp and in the preseason.
Yeah,
I would assume. So it's closer to
he must have been rehabbing
7 months.
He must have been rehabbing like
during
1 to 2 months before the season.
Yeah. Who was the coach at this time? Was it?
I think it was Mike. No, not Mike. It was Frazier. Leslie Frazier.
Yeah, Leslie Frazier. Oh God, jeez. Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, it was Leslie Frazier.
Leslie Frazier, not a good coach, but had a lot of faith. Whoever the offensive coordinator was at the time, had a lot of faith. The medical staff, they trust Adrian. And I'm gonna get back to some of these game logs, and then we'll look at the overall season for Adrian. But yeah, the game logs are really crazy because he did get ramped up relatively slowly. By the end of the season, his final game actually hit 34 carries as opposed to 17 week 1, 16 week 2. That's pretty big volume here. I mean, he's not dealing with a good quarterback, Christian Ponder. So literally the game plan here, just give the ball to Adrian on the ground. There's there's no other method, or there's no other venue, or sorry, what am I saying? There's no other way to get him the football. I mean, he only had 3 targets this game. Next game, he had 4. They're just feeding him the ball on the ground. And his efficiency so far has been fine. I mean, 4.94 yards per attempt the first game, 3.744 the next. So he's slowly coming back. I mean, he scored 2 touchdowns in the first game, nothing in the next few. But, I mean, at least you're seeing some of this old Adrian Peterson, right? They wouldn't be giving him the ball this many times if he weren't at least looking somewhat like his old self. Week 4 was kind of where, I don't want to call it a breakout, but this was his first 100-yard game of the season. And he ended up having many, and we'll go into those. But, yeah, week 4, they get a win. They move to 3-1. He has 21 carries for 102 yards. So an efficient day, and he has at this point, a season-high 4 catches. So right here, he has 25 touches once again. He's really balling out. He's racking up yards. But I'm going to skip ahead a few games because I think the reason people like this year so much for Adrian and why he won the MVP is because of his efficiency on the ground. So far, we're seeing pretty pedestrian efficiency numbers. He's had a couple good games, closer to 5, and a couple well below 4. We're going to jump out to week 7 now. Week 7 against Arizona, they end up winning this game. He has 23 carries for 153 yards, which is a 6.65 yard per attempt average. And you'd think that's good, but he continues to get better. Next game, 123 on the ground on 15 carries, 8.2. The next game, it keeps on getting better. 17 carries for 182 yards and 2 touchdowns. So again, 10.71. And that's his peak, but it's not like he's really falling off from there. The next 2 games, he's at 6 or above in terms of yards per attempt, with 182 yards and 172 yards in the ground, respectively. And we got a few more good weeks here. I mean, I don't really want to talk too much about it. It's hard to ignore weeks where he goes 18 for 108, but I mean, we're going to skip that. Week 12 for Adrian. That's probably maybe his best week, especially efficiency-wise. Not nearly as good as that Seattle game, but 21 carries for 210 yards and a touchdown, 10 yards per carry. His not even his highest rushing total for a game this year, and that's what's crazy. A few games later, he has 24 carries for 212 yards and a touchdown. So that's right under 9. And, I mean, he continues chugging along. At this point, we're seeing him getting carries between 24 and like 34 by the end of the season, 199 yards and a touchdown. So he's just getting fed the ball. It's kind of crazy to see. Like, who's someone coming off an ACL tear, who's come off an ACL tear the last few years that we can compare him to?
I mean, Dalvin Cook, but what happens?
Sure.
I'm not going to speak, medically, but what happens with a lot of ACL tears, like, is that because of the weakened ACL, a lot of players have like hamstring problems where they have a lot of tension, they have a lot of strain in their hamstring, and then that reduces their mobility. So because of the weakened ACL, so I can't imagine it would be any different for Adrian Peterson. But it's just different from different players. But I assume that it would be a lot worse for him because of his reduced recovery time. So he must have been playing through a lot of pain regardless of, how well he performed, which makes it more impressive.
Also, as a running back, I guess you're just straining your knees and like constantly also. So like I think that is something that you think could aggravate the injuries as well. I think Gronk also came back from an ACL tear. I don't know when that was. 2013 or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
Yeah.
I'm pulling up Dalvin stuff. He tore his ACL twice, but I'm looking at the one that so he tore his ACL as a rookie year after like 4 games. So he tore his ACL well before Adrian Peterson did, like in terms of the week. So he tore it during week 4, had surgery soon after. So he had most of that season, the 2017 season, to recover, and then he ends up starting in week 1. Week 1, he actually gets 22 touches. Not very efficient, 16 carries or 40 yards, but he gets 22 touches. But then I think at that point they realize this isn't the way to go for anyone not named Adrian Peterson. Then he gets 13 touches. 14 touches. So they've really dialed him back, and I think that's probably the smart play in terms of long-term health. But I mean, Adrian Peterson, different kind of guy.
I think I was watching that game with Dalvin, and I think he went out he went out at some point to get his to get checked for some injury. So I think it was pretty early on that they found out that he wouldn't be able to, return to this rookie season level without waiting
immediately.
Some time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's different for every player. The recovery is different. The way they rehab, the way their body responds is always different. But I assume that Adrian Peterson must have gone through some turmoil during that season. Even though he must have played through it, or he must have ignored it, or taken some painkillers. He had to have gone through some pain, because you can't recover that quickly without, some long-term or some short-term even downfalls.
Yeah, it probably had some long-term effects. I mean, he got injured again, I think, in 2 years later, right? 2014? I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a running back, so every running back gets injured.
But yeah, anyway, I mean, you see all these numbers, and we'll look at the overall stats now for Adrian Peterson. For 2012, played 16 games, which in and of itself is an impressive stat. But we're looking at the yardage numbers here for Adrian, and he had a crazy amount. Obviously, his career high topped that 2008 season Keshav mentioned earlier. He had 2,097 rushing yards on 348 attempts. So 348 attempts is just 15 less than he had that 2008 season. And this is coming after an ACL, MCL, meniscus tear. He gets completely rode. Yeah, rode. That was a weird word choice. But he gets 348 carries. He scores 12 touchdowns. And then the impressive thing here is he also has 40 catches. Again, second in his career behind that 43 in 2009. So in total, he has 388 touches. And I don't want to talk about this for too long, but I have some stats pulled up. I talked about this in our Jamal Charles video, but I compared some of these numbers to other notable seasons like Jamal Charles, LaDainian Tomlinson in 2006, Brian Westbrook 2007, and McCaffrey this past season. In terms of touches, Adrian Peterson was third amongst these guys. So McCaffrey, I know McCaffrey ended up with 403, and those aren't necessarily the same kind of touches though, right? When you're getting the ball and you're being pounded up the middle, it's a lot higher lever. No, I don't want to say higher leverage, but higher risk. And Adrian only had 15 less total touches. And then LaDainian Tomlinson 404. That's a completely different year. He had an outstanding season. But Adrian with 2,300 total yards in this group, he ranked third, so just behind LT and McCaffrey. And McCaffrey, you're going to see, probably is going to lead a lot of people just because of that reception number. But yards per touch, Adrian really impressive, ahead of McCaffrey, and he's really ahead of especially LT and Westbrook by a significant margin. The only guy ahead of him is Jamal Charles, of course, which is why we talked about him in the past video. And he scored 13 touchdowns, which isn't as impressive as Jamal, LT, and McCaffrey, but it was more than Brian Westbrook. So, I mean, I just wanted to throw out these numbers. These were more catered towards Jamal Charles. But, I mean, here's the one stat that Adrian really has going for him. I had this listed as yards per carry delta, which is it's just their yards per carry for the season relative to the season average amongst all running backs. And LaDainian had a pretty good season. He was a yard over the average. But then Adrian Peterson shattered that with 1.7. He averaged 6 yards per attempt, and the league average is 4.3 this season. So it's kind of crazy.
Also, I mean, this season, it was just him and basically their quarterback was Christian Ponder. I think their best receiver was let's see, what's his name? Oh yeah, it was Percy Harvin at the time. But it's not like Christian Ponder was a great quarterback or anything. So, it was mainly Adrian Peterson taking the load for this team and doing actually pretty well, leading them to a pretty decent season.
And I'm actually not. So Percy Harvin was injured as well. So.
Oh really? Oh
yeah.
man. So it's just him and Christian Ponder, you know.
Yeah, and also this is the first MVP since LT to be a running back. And even at that time, it was a lot more common for running backs to be MVPs in general. You know, the season before, Sean Alexander, and then guys like Terrell Davis, Barry Sanders, Emmitt Smith, they were all named MVPs. But in this new era, it's been the quarterbacks. So the Aaron Rodgers, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, all those guys have been, named MVPs. So to see, a running back be able to do it was super impressive. Especially coming off, all things considered, we've talked a lot about the injuries and everything. And even the team itself is just not great. So it was an amazing season.
Yeah. And also, Keshav, their best receiver was, tight end Kyle Rudolph. Kyle Rudolph had nine touchdowns, so he had a pretty solid
season. He was a solid season. Okay.
Yeah. But I think that just about does it for the 2012 season, right? I mean, we like Chirag said, the injuries we talked about for a while. I brought up some of those numbers. I think my biggest takeaway for the season was, obviously how fast he came back, but then also how they handled the situation, how they clearly trusted him. And by the end of the season, less than a year after tearing exactly ACL, guy was getting 34 carries per game. That's unheard of.
Yeah, also, I was looking at his injury reports, and he also had a sports hernia in week 10. But he played through it for the rest of the season. So, recently we've seen guys like Odell Beckham have sports hernias, and he suffered greatly because of that injury, having his
Deontay Johnson. It's surgery.
But I mean, OBJ is notable because he had the worst season of his career with the sports hernia, but AP played through it.
And Ro, you were mentioning it earlier. I mean, he got off to I'd say a relatively slow start at the beginning of the season. But just looking at the stat right here, in the final 10 games of the season, he rushed for 1,600 yards and 10 touchdowns, and he averaged 7 yards a carry in the final 10 games itself. So
yeah, there you go.
To, I believe, he traveled to the hospital to meet his son, but he ended up playing the next game. And
damn.
This season he had some injuries as well. So just overall, it wasn't for Adrian Peterson, mentally, physically, it wasn't a great season for him. Moving on to the next season, 2014, some more things happened to Adrian Peterson. I actually remember this very well. I remember waking up in the morning and I looked on SportsCenter, and there was a report that Peterson was indicted for charges of child abuse.
Yeah, that was big.
That's where I thought you were going to talk about, but I didn't realize the other son died.
I forgot about the thing that happened before, but yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about that completely. I didn't even remember that. But this happened in week 2. of the NFL season, and in a few days later, the Vikings reinstated him, but then the NFL added him to the commissioner's exempt list, so he was no longer able to play. So he had some legal issues at this time. I believe, I'm not sure about specifics, but I remember watching and it said that he was like hitting his sons with sticks in their backyard. I'm not sure if any of you guys have any other details or thoughts about this, but it was a pretty big deal. Coming off, he was a former MVP, probably the best running back at this time. For that to happen it was interesting to see.
I don't want to say anything controversial that isn't like related to like hot takes regarding like actual sports, but I remember like weren't a lot of people like on Adrian Peterson's side here. They were like, "Oh, this shit happened to me when I was a kid."
Yeah, a lot of people said it's normal. I don't know.
I remember like I think Adrian Peterson didn't he wasn't trying to like defend himself either. He was just kind of like he was defending his actions actually. But
it's like
I think why it was reported was because they were in their backyard and then the neighbors saw it and I think they called the police. That's what happened. I'm pretty sure. But
did you mention this too about how he pushed this was a different son, he pushed another son off a motorbike video game like at the arcade?
Oh. But
I can't really see a situation where that is necessary.
Yeah. I'm not sure if where I got this, but I'm pretty sure he said that, if it's in his own home and he's doing it to his own children, he should be allowed to do it. Like he said, like it's disciplining. It's not any form of like abuse. But
also wait, apparently Adrian Peterson's son calls him Daddy Peterson.
Okay. What if he called him Purple Jesus?
Purple Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't a great look for Adrian Peterson. Some people may have been, defending him, but I think overall it was just not great because he missed the entire season, and it's always something you remember about Adrian as a player, but he wasn't able to play for the rest of the season because of his legal issues. On February 26, 2015, he was reinstated into the league after he was ruled. Did he win the case? I'm not sure. But he still played football. He returned to the Vikings on June 2nd, and as you can guess, he struggled in the beginning of the season. I actually remember there's a lot of hype for this comeback because it had been an entire year since he played, but he struggled in the first game. But in the second game, he was back to normal AD or AP. 29 rushes, 134 yards. And then the Vikings actually had a great start this season. They went 8-3. And he had some crazy games. He had a 203-yard game with an 80-yard touchdown run, which is actually his 6th 200-plus yard rushing game, tied with another controversial guy, O.J. Simpson. As a running back, great running back, but we won't talk about anything else.
Trug, I searched up the whole case, by the way. So he avoided jail time, obviously. You would have heard about that, but he paid a $4,000 fine, and then obviously whatever court costs were, and then he was sentenced to 80 hours of community service. And obviously $4,000, that it already sounds like a very small amount, but then also, Trug, you'll talk about this in a second. Whenever he tore his meniscus, like the second time, I read something that he ended up spending like $11,000 a week on rehab. So for him to just pay $4,000 a year, it was literally nothing.
Yeah, and looking at his contract, he's getting paid,
Jesus, yeah, 96 million. Yeah.
Just for contracts, I'm sure endorsements. I'm not sure if he had any at this point, but just to me, it just it's not proportionate.
No, that's nothing.
NFL athlete. I think he definitely thought he got off free. But yeah, this season, he got another rushing title actually. 327 rushes for 1,485 yards, which is really impressive coming off basically a season where he had to battle legal issues. Probably didn't have probably the time to train, but still not getting any NFL time. Going into the 2016 season, he only played 3 games, and he tore his meniscus this season once again in his right knee. I'm not sure if if it was the same meniscus as last time. But also he had a LCL sprain he had to recover from. So just everything's catching up to him at this point in terms of injuries. And then knowing this, the Vikings decided that at the end of the season, they wouldn't be bringing him back for his 2017 option. As we were talking about earlier, he was being paid. He would have been paid at $18 million this season, but the Vikings decided to opt out. I think it was a smart decision. Obviously, he's been injured. He in his last full season he won a rushing title, but paying $18 million to a guy that's at this point 31 years old wouldn't be a smart decision. At the end of the season, he decides to sign with the Saints for a 2-year, $7 million contract, but he didn't play long for this team. He played 4 games actually, and he got traded to the
Cardinals.
And I think this was when David Johnson got injured, right?
Cardinals, yeah.
Oh, what did I say?
To the Vikings.
Oh, my bad. Okay. You got traded to the Cardinals, and I think this is the season David Johnson got injured, right?
Yeah. We don't like talking about that here.
So, yeah, it was disappointing.
I took him first overall. Actually, can I really talk about 2017? Really, just give me 25, 30 seconds. Okay. So I took David Johnson first. So he obviously got hurt after 1 game. He had some bullshit injury, wrist, like a toe, wrist. Yeah, fucking bullshit. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's kind of big because he catches passes. It doesn't matter. So I lose David Johnson, and then also I was rostering Alvin Kamara at the beginning of the season. But after a few weeks, I don't think he'd done much. They were just giving the ball to Mark Ingram and Adrian Peterson. So I, of course, was like, I don't have time to wait on Alvin. So I dropped Alvin, who finished as like the RB3 or some shit. So this year, I'm all in. I'm gonna stay patient. I'm gonna trust my young guys and let them do their job. Especially now, I feel like they have some. Actually, Antonio, right? We'll talk about Antonio later.
Antonio Gibson.
All right, sorry.
Yeah. So on the Cardinals, he didn't do, he didn't put up crazy numbers, but in 6 games he had 448 yards, which is actually really good. He got a lot of carries though, 129 6 games, which is like 23 around per game, which is a lot for a 32-year-old running back. But after this season, I think he got cut, unfortunately, and then the Redskins, or now the football team,
Washington football team,
now signed Adrian Peterson to a vet minimum, and actually he had a 1,000-yard season in 2018, which is crazy. I think I had him in fantasy, but it doesn't matter. He didn't really catch any passes. It's beyond the point, but he had a great season, 1,000-yard season, at 33 years old, signing a veteran minimum on the Washington team.
Football team. The Washington football team.
My bad. But 2019 season, didn't have a great season. The return of Darius Geis, another guy that has been cut by his football team.
Another guy who had some ACL issues too.
Yeah, but he has been cut. So now moving on to he had a good season, 898 yards, 211 carries, which is 4.3 yards per carry, which honestly is around what he was doing in 2009, 2010. So it's not that bad in terms of efficiency, but 2020 might be the last season of Adrian Peterson.
Last year was contract.
Yeah, Rohit, he's going to talk about some exciting young guys on the football team that may be able to take over Adrian Peterson's spot.
Yeah, I mean, this is just something I requested just because I like talking about some of these some of these backfields. Go pretty fast here, but I mean, as good as Adrian is the starter. Don't get me wrong; they clearly like Adrian. That there's a reason they gave him 211 carries last year, and he's on a 2-year contract, still getting paid, and he's still doing his job, right? So he's going to be at the top. But this team is flush with a kind of mid-tier running back prospects like Bryce Love and Antonio Gibson, and then also veteran guys J.D. McKissick and Peyton. That's what 5 running backs right there. So I wouldn't expect McKissick or especially Barber to make the roster, but Bryce Love and Antonio Gibson are really interesting because, especially Antonio Gibson, because his skill set unique in that backfield. Adrian, like we've talked about, has peaked at 43 catches on a season in 2009. But Antonio is a guy who could single-handedly exceed that in his rookie season. Not a big-time rushing. I don't want to say he's a bad rushing option, but he only rushed the ball like 30 times last year in college. But he's got that intriguing skill set where if he can slowly just break out and make some big plays, I could see him getting 7 to 8 targets a game. And again, this is a player who got a touchdown every 5 touches last year. So he's an intriguing option to monitor. I got him in one of the last rounds in the draft. So that was what was surprising. His ADP is like in the 9th to 8th round. So if you can get him late, he's even Bryce Love, pretty solid.
Yeah, and as Ron Rivera said, he has that McCaffrey skill set. So if you're getting that type of praise from Ron Rivera, then I expect some good things in the future. But looking back at Adrian Peterson's career, it's not over yet. Obviously, maybe he puts up another 1,000 yards somehow. But it's just super impressive the way he's been able to start off his career early. And then now in his final years, he still puts up close to 1,000 yards in the last season, 1,000 yards in 2018. At 34, we talk about a lot of guys that are playing well at a late age. Obviously Frank Gore. Here on the pod, Frank Gore is one of our favorites, former Niner, but he's still playing at a high level at his age. And just super impressive stuff.
Yeah. I mean, both these guys are old as hell. Both these guys working really hard. And Frank, what they said, 40% carry split with Le'Veon, and then Adrian Peterson. Again, like I said, Antonio's not a huge rushing threat. Bryce Love has had some injury issues. So Adrian expected a lot of work from him in 2020. If this is his last year, honestly, maybe he'll get voted into the Pro Bowl, right? People like Adrian. So he hasn't made the Pro Bowl since 2015. That'll be nice to see. But unless you guys have anything else to add, I think we've covered a lot of Adrian Peterson's career. We talked about the injuries. We talked about his childhood, talked about some of the legal stuff, and of course, his incredible on the field play. But yeah, we enjoyed making this tribute to Purple Jesus. But I think that'll just about do it for this episode of TTP. We will see you tomorrow. Yeah, I actually forgot to address this. So before we go, I think we're streaming the final of our NBA draft, our NBA 2K draft tomorrow. I think we'll be doing that on YouTube. So if you guys are subbed to this channel, which should be, click sub down below, you will get an update for that. We'll post it on Instagram as well. But yeah, we'll see you guys tomorrow.